In 1881, the town of Tombstone passed an ordinance that made it a crime to carry a weapon inside the city limits. The famous gunfight near the OK Corral started over that law. But here is the twist. The men who lived hardest on the frontier did not stop carrying. They just got cleverer about hiding it. Number 14 on this list was so quiet a lawman could shake your hand and never feel it under your sleeve. Number 3 was banned in saloons across Kansas because it killed at the card table more often than any rifle ever did on the trail. These were the tools desperate men trusted when the law was a 3-day ride away and the next stranger might be the last face you ever saw. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because some of these vanished so completely, most folks today have never even heard their names. Let us count down. Number 25, the pepperbox pistol. Before the revolver took over the West, the pepperbox was the gambler's quiet friend. Instead of one barrel and a spinning cylinder, it had a cluster of 4, 5, sometimes 6 barrels welded together that rotated with each pull of the trigger. By the 1850s, a serviceable pepperbox cost about $8 at a frontier outfitter, cheap enough that a cowhand earning $30 a month could afford one. It was not accurate past a card table's width, and old-timers joked it was as dangerous to the man holding it as the man in front of it. But in a stagecoach or a crowded bar room, accuracy was never the point. The point was that it fit in a vest pocket, fired several times without reloading, and gave a cornered man a fighting chance. When Colt's revolvers grew cheaper, the pepperbox faded fast, remembered now mostly in the diaries of men who survived because of it. Number 24, the slingshot. Do not confuse it with a slingshot. The slingshot was a length of braided cord or leather with a heavy lead weight sewn into one end, and it was the silent equalizer of the docks, the rail yards, and the back alleys of every cattle town. A man could carry it coiled in his coat, and the law rarely knew what to make of it. Sailors made them at sea, and the habit drifted west, with men chasing work. Swung hard, that weighted end could drop a larger opponent before he ever raised his fists. By the 1870s, several states had quietly outlawed carrying one, lumping it with brass knuckles as a tool of ambush rather than honest defense. It left no powder smoke, made no sound but the whistle of cord through air, and could be tossed in a river before a marshal ever arrived. Number 23, the Arkansas toothpick. This was a long, double-edged blade, sometimes 1.5 feet of straight steel, built for thrusting rather than skinning game. The name was a frontier joke, the kind of dark humor men used to make peace with dangerous things. A good one from a town blacksmith cost a few dollars, and a man wore it sheathed down his back or tucked into his boot. In the rough river settlements of Arkansas and Tennessee, where dueling with blades outlasted dueling with pistols, the toothpick earned a fearsome name. It was banned by name in more than one state law aimed at curbing knife fights. Heavy enough to feel like a short sword in the hand, it gave a smaller man reach against a bigger one, and on the trail it doubled as a tool for everything from prying to digging when the shooting was done. Number 22, the push dagger. Here was a blade designed to disappear into a closed fist. The handle sat crosswise in the palm, the short blade jutting out between the fingers so a man's whole arm became the weapon. Gamblers favored it because it rode flat in a vest or a boot and could be drawn faster than a knife with a handle. In the mining camps of California and Nevada, where claim jumpers settled disputes up close, the push dagger was the weapon of the sudden quarrel. Lawmen hated them precisely because they were so easy to conceal, and several frontier towns wrote them into the same ordinances that banned hidden pistols. A man could lose at faro, shake hands, and have steel in his palm before anyone at the table understood the game had changed. Number 21. The cap and ball pocket revolver. Before metal cartridges, a man loaded his revolver one chamber at a time, packing in powder, ball, and a percussion cap. The small pocket models, like the Colt of the 1849 pattern, weighed barely over a pound and rode easy in a coat. Hundreds of thousands were made, which tells you how badly the frontier wanted something small and deadly. The trade-off was reloading, a slow and fiddly business that no man wanted to attempt with trouble already in the room. So men carried them loaded and capped, day after day, trusting the powder to stay dry. The smell of that black powder smoke hung in saloons long after the shooting stopped. When self-contained cartridges arrived, these old cap and ball guns became relics almost overnight. But for 2 decades, they were the last word in pocket protection. Number 20. The boot knife. Plain, cheap, and everywhere. A boot knife was a short, flat blade with a low-profile handle, sheathed inside the boot against the ankle or down the side of the shaft. A cowhand could buy one for $1 or $2, and most never went anywhere without it. It was the weapon of last resort, the one a man reached for when his pistol was empty, knocked away, or surrendered at a saloon door under a town's no-guns rule. That last part mattered. When the marshal made you check your 6-shooter at the bar, the boot knife stayed where it was, quiet and forgotten. Lawmen knew this, and a careful one patted down a stranger's legs as a matter of habit. But there were a lot of boots in a cattle town, and a marshal could not search them all. Number 19, the sword cane. Imagine a perfectly ordinary walking stick, the kind a gentleman might lean on as he stepped off the train. Now imagine that with a twist of the handle, 18 inches of slim steel slid free from inside it. The sword cane came west with riverboat gamblers and well-dressed con men, the sort who needed to look respectable while staying ready. It cost more than most frontier weapons, sometimes $10 or $15, because it was as much fashion as defense. But that respectability was the whole trick. A man carrying a rifle drew every eye in town. A man with a cane drew none. By the 1880s, several cities had outlawed concealed blades of exactly this kind, but a sword cane was almost impossible to spot until the blade was already out, gleaming in the lamplight. Number 18, the LeMat revolver. Here is where things get strange. The LeMat was a revolver with a secret. Below its 9-shot cylinder ran a second, larger barrel that fired a load of buckshot like a tiny shotgun. A man could empty 9 pistol rounds, then flip a lever and unleash a spray of shot at close range, all from one gun. It was heavy, complicated, and expensive, and it never sold in great numbers, which is exactly why surviving examples are treasured today. But a man who carried one carried 2 weapons in his hand at once. On the open trail, facing more than one rider, that final shotgun blast was an ace no one expected. It was the kind of gun whispered about in bunkhouses, the gun that turned a losing fight on its head. Number 17, brass knuckles. Cast in solid brass or iron, knuckles slid over the fingers and turned a man's punch into something that could crack bone. They cost almost nothing and hid in any pocket, which made them the favorite of bouncers, brawlers, and men who expected the night to end badly. By the 1870s, lawmakers across the country were specifically naming brass knuckles in the statutes that banned concealed weapons, putting them in the same outlawed category as the slungshot and the dagger. The reason was simple. They were a weapon of ambush, useless for hunting and good for one thing only. A man caught with a pair had a hard time explaining himself to a judge. But in a mining town, where fists settled most arguments before guns were ever drawn, a hidden set of knuckles ended fights fast. Number 16. The muff pistol. This was the smallest of the small, a tiny single-shot or double-barrel pistol named because a lady could hide it inside her fur hand muff. But it was not only women who carried them. Gamblers, dance hall men, and anyone who needed a gun no one would search for kept a muff pistol tucked in a glove or a vest. It fired a small ball at very short range, and it was deadly only across a few feet, which on the frontier was often all the range a quarrel allowed. A man surrendering his belt revolver at a saloon door could walk in still armed, the little pistol warm against his ribs. Lawmen knew the trick, but a gun this small was nearly impossible to find. Without a thorough search, no marshal had time to give every customer. Number 15. The Bowie knife. No frontier blade is more legendary. The Bowie was a big, heavy fighting knife with a clip-point tip, often 10 inches or longer, made famous by the man whose name it carried and the deadly reputation that followed. A fine one from a skilled smith could cost more than a pistol, and men wore them with pride, sheathed at the hip where everyone could see. That visibility was part of the message. A Bowie said its owner was not to be trifled with. It chopped wood, skinned game, and cut rope by day, and by lamplight it settled disputes the law would never hear about. So feared was the Bowie that several southern states passed laws against carrying one, taxing, or banning the blade outright. A man who owned a good Bowie often owned little else of value, and he guarded it like family. Number 14. The sleeve gun. First pattern break, and here is one of the cleverest. A sleeve gun was a tiny pistol rigged to slide down the forearm into a waiting hand by way of a spring-loaded contraption strapped beneath the coat. With a flick of the wrist, a man went from empty-handed to armed in the time it took to blink. Professional gamblers and card sharps prized these above almost anything, because the whole game of cheating and the violence that followed came down to who was ready first. A lawman could shake a man's hand, look him in the eye, and never feel the rig waiting under his sleeve. They were custom-built and pricey, the tool of a specialist, not a cowhand. But a man who survived a saloon shooting by a quarter second often owed his life to that hidden spring. Number 13. The coach gun. Wells Fargo guards' riding shotgun made this weapon famous, and the phrase riding shotgun comes straight from it. A coach gun was a double-barreled shotgun with the barrels cut short, usually under 20 inches, so it could swing fast in the tight space atop a moving stagecoach. Loaded with buckshot, it was devastating at close range and forgiving of poor aim, which mattered when bandits came out of the rocks at a gallop. Outlaws prized the same weapon for the same reasons, sawing down ordinary shotguns to ride hidden in a saddle scabbard or under a long coat. A sawed-off shotgun pointed across a barroom ended arguments without a shot ever fired. Cheap, brutal, and impossible to miss with, it was the great equalizer of the frontier, feared by lawman and outlaw alike. Number 12. The dirk. A dirk was a long, slim dagger, sharp on one or both edges, built purely for stabbing. It came west in the belts of Scottish and Irish immigrants and found a home in the rough world of the docks and the mining camps. Smaller and lighter than a Bowie, it hit easier, which is exactly why the law took an interest. By the mid-1800s, the word dirk appeared by name in concealed weapon statutes from the South to California, listed right alongside the toothpick and the slungshot. A man wore one inside his waistband or strapped to his calf, drawing it only when matters had gone past words. It made no noise, threw no smoke, and could be hidden again in an instant. For the man who could not afford a pistol or could not carry one openly under a town's law, the dirk was protection $1 could buy. Number 11, the garrote. This one belonged to the shadows. A garrote was nothing more than a length of cord, wire, or rawhide with a handle at each end, but in the hands of a man who meant harm, it was silent and final. It carried a sinister reputation up from the cattle trails of the Southwest and the lawless border towns, where robbery and ambush were a way of life for some. No lawman could ban a piece of cord, which is precisely what made it so unsettling. It announced itself with no flash, no bang, no warning at all. Honest men feared it more than any pistol because a gun at least gave you the courtesy of a sound. We mention it here because it was real and it was carried, a grim reminder that the romantic West had a dark underside the dime novels never sold. Number 10, the Derringer's bigger cousin, the pocket revolver and cartridge. When metal cartridges arrived in the 1870s, gunmakers shrank the revolver down to fit a vest pocket so it could be loaded in seconds instead of minutes. Models like the small 5-shooters of the era weighed under a pound and cost around $10, putting a fast, reliable hideout gun in reach of nearly anyone. This was the gun a shopkeeper kept under the counter and a traveler kept in his coat. It would not win a duel at 20 paces, but at the distance of a robbery, which was almost always close, it did the job. Because it loaded quickly, a man was never caught fumbling with powder and ball at the worst moment. These little revolvers, sold by the hundreds of thousands, the quiet workhorses of frontier self-defense, carried by people whose names history never bothered to record. Number 9, the throwing knife. Romanticized in countless stories, the balanced throwing knife was a real, if uncommon, tool of frontier showmen, scouts, and the occasional desperate man. A well-made blade, designed to fly true, cost more than an ordinary knife, and learning to throw one well took years most men did not have. But a thrown blade was silent, and it could close a gap a man could not cross with his feet in time. Far more often, the throwing knife earned its keep in traveling shows and saloon wagers where a sharpshooter with steel drew a crowd and emptied their pockets. Still, on the trail, a hidden blade that could be hurled was one more card in a dangerous hand. Its place on this list is earned more by legend than by the body count, but legends on the frontier had a way of keeping men alive through sheer reputation. Number 8, the blackjack and the sap. Second pattern break, and now we come to the lawman's own quiet sin. A blackjack was a small leather sack filled with lead shot or sand, sometimes spring-loaded, swung to stun a man without killing him. A sap was its flatter cousin. Both were the tools of the night marshal, the bouncer, and the bounty hunter who needed a prisoner breathing rather than dead. But here is the controversy. The same weapons were carried by the very men those lawmen hunted because a blackjack ended a fight without the noise of a gunshot that would bring a posse running. By the 1870s, many of the same laws banning brass knuckles swept up the blackjack too, branding it a weapon of ambush. It left a man's victims dazed rather than dead, which the law somehow found more sinister, not less, because it spoke of intent to take a man down quietly. Number 7, the Apache combination weapon. Imported from France but whispered about wherever trouble gathered, this strange device combined 3 weapons in one folding frame. It was a small pinfire pistol, a set of knuckle dusters for the grip, and a short folding blade, all hinged together into a single ugly tool. It had no real barrel to speak of, so it was useless past arm's length. It was as likely to miss fire as to fire. But that was never the point. The point was that a man cornered in an alley could shoot, then bludgeon, then cut, all without changing weapons. Rare in America and prized by collectors today, it surfaced in the rougher port cities and border towns where the most desperate characters drifted. It was the weapon of a man who expected the fight to be close, dirty, and without rules of any kind. Number 6. The hideout boot revolver. Slightly larger than the muff pistol, but still small enough to vanish, the boot revolver was a multi-shot pistol designed specifically to ride inside a tall boot. Unlike a single-shot Derringer, it gave a man several chances if the first did not settle matters. Lawmen and outlaws alike carried one as a backup to the belt gun. The second card, no one knew, was in the deck. When a man surrendered his visible weapon at a saloon door under a town's no-guns ordinance, the boot revolver stayed hidden against his calf, fully loaded and forgotten by everyone but its owner. Stories from the era are full of fights that turned. When a man thought disarmed, suddenly produced a gun from nowhere. That nowhere was almost always a boot. It was insurance for the kind of life where the second weapon often mattered more than the first. Number 5. The Henry repeating rifle. Third, pattern break, and now we leave the pocket for the saddle. The Henry rifle changed everything. Where most men still fired a single shot and reloaded, the Henry held more than a dozen cartridges and could empty them as fast as a man could work the lever. Confederate soldiers who faced it in the Civil War called it the rifle you loaded on Sunday and fired all week. After the war, it rode west in thousands of saddle scabbards, and the man who owned one held a fearsome advantage over a band of attackers still working single-shot guns. It cost a small fortune, sometimes $40 or more, the price of months of wages, so a Henry marked its owner as either prosperous or desperate enough to spend everything on survival. On the open plains, where help never came, that wall of rapid fire was the difference between a grave and a story to tell. Number 4. The knuckle knife. Picture a heavy fighting blade with a guard cast as a full set of brass knuckles, so a single weapon could both stab and shatter. Some were made by frontier blacksmiths, others bought from catalog outfitters, and a fine one cost real money. The design said everything about the world that made it. A man might punch his way out of a brawl, then bring the blade into play if punching was not enough, all without dropping his weapon or changing his grip. These ugly, brutal tools fell squarely under the concealed weapon bans of the day, named as exactly the sort of instrument an honest man had no need to hide. But in the rough quarters of a cattle town on payday, surrounded by drunk and dangerous strangers, a man's idea of what he needed to hide could change quickly. It was a weapon for someone who planned to survive the worst kind of night. Number 3. The over-under Derringer. Here is the gun that earned its banishment honestly. The compact two-barrel Derringer, with one barrel stacked over the other, was the gambler's gun above all others. It fired a large, slow bullet that hit hard at the close range of a card table, and it disappeared into a vest pocket, a glove, or a lady's purse. It was the weapon of choice for cheating men and the men who hunted cheaters, and it killed more often at the faro and poker tables of Kansas and the silver towns of Nevada than any rifle ever did on the trail. Saloons across the West tried to ban it, marshals tried to search for it, and still it slipped through every door. The reason was simple. A man could lose his money, smile, reach into his coat as if for a handkerchief, and end the argument with 2 shots before anyone read the murder in his eyes. It was small, deadly, and almost impossible to stop. Number 2, the bullwhip. Long before it became a movie hero's prop, the bullwhip was a working tool that doubled as a fearsome weapon in skilled hands. A cowhand used it to move cattle, but a man who truly knew the whip could disarm an attacker, snatch a pistol from a hand, or cut a stripe across an opponent that no one ever or forgot. It cost little, raised no suspicion, and was legal to carry anywhere because every drover needed one for honest work. That was its genius. A marshal could not ban a tool of the cattle trade, even when he knew full well what a master could do with it. The crack of a bullwhip was a sound that carried for a mile. A warning and a threat folded into one. Few men learned to fight with it well, but those who did commanded a respect that no hidden pistol could buy. Number 1, the single-shot Derringer. And at the top stands the smallest gun of all, the one that left the deepest mark on the frontier and the country itself. A single-shot Derringer was little more than a short barrel, a grip and a trigger, firing one large ball at point-blank range. It fit in the palm of a hand and weighed almost nothing. It was the last resort, the surrender gun, the weapon a man kept when he had nothing else. And it was carried by gamblers, by women traveling alone, by anyone who needed a gun no search would find. Its place in history was sealed forever in a theater in 1865 when a single-shot Derringer was used to kill a president, proving that the smallest weapon could change the course of a nation. On the frontier, that lesson played out 1,000 quieter times. The man you least suspected, the one who looked unarmed, the one who smiled as he reached into his coat, often held in his hand the deadliest secret of the West. One barrel, one ball, one chance. And on the frontier, one chance was sometimes all a man got. From the rattle of the pepper box to the deadly secret of the Derringer, these 25 weapons tell the real story of the Old West, a place where the law was far away and a man's survival often hung on what he could hide. Which one surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments, and if you made it this far, you already know more about the frontier than most folks ever will.